Vancouver's real estate market continues to struggle. We had one of the worst Novembers on record. So is this the real estate correction that everyone's been waiting for, or is this just the beginning? In today's video, I'll show you the shift that's been happening using custom graphs you can't find anywhere else because I created them, and we'll try to break down what's likely to happen over the next 90 days. The data I'm using for these graphs comes from the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver. They just released their stats, and a lot of headlines are talking about the shift between November 2024 and November 2025, more specifically how the sales in November 2025 are down as comparing to last year. However, I think to get a more accurate idea, we should look at the last 10 years. So here's the graph over the last 10 years of November sales. And as you can see, the sales are sort of all over the place. We had some very busy years like 2015 and 2021, 2020 and 2019 have also been up there. If you look at 2025, yes, it is significantly lower in terms of sales comparing to 2024. However, I would argue 2024 was a bit on an upper trajectory. I remember that time very clearly. There was a lot of optimism in the air. It seemed like the real estate market, quote unquote, turned the corner, and it looked like 2025 was going to be a pretty sort of busy year. So a lot of people were trying to get ahead of the curve, and there was a lot of transactions. A lot of people were looking to purchase. Of course, tariffs hit in early 2025, and a lot of things have changed since then. Based on sales numbers only, 2025 wasn't the slowest year over the last 10 years. In fact, it was the fourth slowest. 2023, 2022, and 2017 have all been lower in terms of sales. However, if we include inventory levels into the picture, I think everything changes quite significantly. As you can see, 2014 already had a pretty high level of inventory. This was after a pretty major slowdown in the real estate market. The interest rates went up, and a lot of people were listing their places for sale because many sellers were afraid of the mortgage cliff. On top of that, the sales were pretty slow, so inventory just naturally was accumulating on the market. However, if you look at 2025 levels of inventory, once again, this is for November months only, it's record high. It's over 15,000. In fact, it's 15,149 units listed on the market between all types of inventory. It's the highest we've seen over the last 10 years. It might be the highest we've seen ever. And the sales are not there to justify this level of inventory. Again, if you look at other years that were slower, the 2023, 2022, and 2017, they all had much lower levels of inventory as comparing to 2025. So that's where the picture sort of gets worse for the current market conditions. And if you look at the months of inventory graph, this is really a good way to visualize how stark the differences are. Months of inventory essentially refers to how long it would take to sell out all the currently listed apartments, houses, and townhouses on the market at current sales rate. So 1,800 sales roughly per month, how many months it would take to sell it all out. And right now you can see that huge jump in 2025. We are over 8 months of inventory. Once again, over the last 10 years, we have not come even close to it. The closest we've been is 2023 with just over 6 months. So yeah, that's a pretty stark difference. And later on, I will also talk about how does November 2025 compare to other months in 2025. And you will see that the inventory levels have actually gone down. So this month's of inventory graph is already taking into account lower inventory that we have seen as comparing to some of the other months. And we'll talk more about what's going on there in a few minutes or so. Next, let's look at the new listings graph, and you can see that the new listings have actually not been too bad as comparing to some of the other years. We definitely have not seen the most new listings come to the market, so perhaps some silver lining there. You can see 2024 was even higher in terms of new listings, very slightly higher, but higher. And again, this makes sense. As I said, in 2024 there was a lot of optimism in the air, so sellers felt like it was the right time to sell and perhaps try to buy something after the New Year's. Of course, it's very difficult to time the market, and a lot of those bets didn't pay off, or some of them did pay off if they sold right on time before the prices dipped. And once again, we'll talk about the prices in a couple of minutes or so. The other thing that I want to talk about in terms of new listings is the nature of November market. Usually in November, fewer people list their homes for sale, just because the holiday season is right around the corner. It's harder to sell during holidays, and if you don't sell during November and December, then by the time January rolls around, you're already 2 months on the market, so it looks like an old listing. It looks like you've been on the market for a while and you can't sell. So most people prefer to wait until January to list their place, maybe even February, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. Now let's talk about the prices and how they stack up over the last 10 years. These are detached housing prices. You can definitely see a drop between 2024 and 2025. The prices are just slightly higher than what we've seen in 2021. So the benchmark price for a detached house at that time was $1,870,000, and now it's $1,900,600. The prices are definitely dropping. If you look at the prices for townhouses, a similar story emerges, not as dramatic of a shift. And lastly, if you look at the condos, these are the prices over the last 10 years. The prices have gone back to almost 2020 levels. We're somewhere between 2020 and 2021. So the biggest price shifts have happened in the condo market as well as the detached housing market, which makes a lot of sense. First of all, a lot of investors have exited the market, which drove down the condo prices. Usually investors are focused on condos. Secondly, we have the whole pre-sale crisis, which affects the overall resale market for condos as well. As far as the detached houses go, they simply got too expensive. Even with the lower interest rates, it is still very difficult to purchase a detached house in Greater Vancouver. They're simply becoming too unaffordable for average families. So that's why townhouses have sort of stayed steady and flat, so to speak, because first of all, they are family homes. If you have kids, if you're a family, this is probably the type of a property that you're looking to purchase over something like a condo, which is usually more focused towards investors and first-time home buyers. Secondly, the townhouses market is still quote-unquote affordable. It is still very expensive, but if you compare it to a detached house, yeah, it's a lot more sort of within the grasp, within the reach for an average Vancouver family. Now let's take a look at how November 2025 has actually stacked up against other months in 2025. Here are the sales figures, and as you can see, the sales are pretty low. In fact, we're one of the lowest months of sales that we have seen this year. We're somewhere around February, which is not exactly great news. If you remember February 2025, that's when the tariffs hit. That's when a lot of economic uncertainty started to bubble up. People were not ready to make a major purchase like buying a house or a condo or a townhouse because there was no certainty of a job security. Now in November 2025, we are still seeing very low sales. And the shift in sales between October 2025 and November 2025 is pretty drastic. October was one of the busiest months in terms of sales, and November is one of the slowest months. I think that's all due to the fact that some buyers are putting off their purchasing until after the New Year's. I think there's a sentiment in the air that next year will continue to be slow, and a lot of buyers are putting off their purchasing until after the New Year's. They're hoping for more inventory and they're hoping for lower prices. Speaking of inventory, let's actually see how the sales and inventory compare in November as opposed to other months in 2025. And you can see that the inventory levels are actually also dropping, as well as the sales are, yes. But the inventory is somewhere between March and April. And as I said earlier in the video, this is a natural state of the market. Usually for November, there are just fewer listings, and actually a lot of the listings are getting taken off the market for the holiday season, and they will be later relisted in probably January, February, March. I personally have 2 listings that were taken off the market for the holiday season and will relist after the holidays are done, maybe for the spring market or so. It all depends on the sellers, and my sellers are not unique. I know plenty of people that are doing this strategy, especially if they live in the property. It's very difficult to show during holidays. And if you look at the new listings graph, this is really a good way to visualize just how few new listings have come to the market this November as comparing to some of the other months this year. And I'm guessing December is going to be even slower, because if you're not listing your place for sale in November, you're probably not going to list it in December either, unless you absolutely have to. So taking into account the fact that we didn't have that many listings come to the market and we had some drops of inventory, the sales were also lower, which means that months of inventory hasn't really bounced back. You really want this graph to be going down. The fewer months of inventory we have, the better, quote unquote, better the market is doing, because the more transactions we're having. Right now, the months of inventory has actually gone up, which is surprising, right? Because the inventory total has actually dropped. Why is that? Well, it's because the sales were so low. So even though the total number of inventory is lower, the sales are also lower, which means that this graph is going up. We are getting more months of inventory. We'll see how December stacks up. Perhaps we'll see less inventory on the market and the sales might balance itself out. I'd be very curious to see how it goes next month and also how it goes through January and February. That's going to be really the telling. How many listings will come back to the market and how many buyers will come back to the market or enter the market for the first time. As you would imagine, having a lot of inventory, not a lot of sales, has a lot of pressure on the prices to go down. These are the detached housing prices over the last year. And really, it's all on a downwards trajectory. The prices keep on dropping months after months, which just makes sense, right? If you price your home correctly, if you're willing to accept a lower offer, you will sell. If you're not, you won't sell. And the prices thus keep on going down. A similar story is happening in the townhouses market, but it is not as dramatic. The prices have sort of flattened out. And once again, it's because this is the most attractive part of the market for a lot of families, especially if you're upsizing from a condo. Generally speaking, you're probably looking at the townhouse. And speaking of condos, if you look at the condo benchmark prices, you can really see the same story happening with condo market as with the detached houses market. We have this sort of sharp decline, sharp drop in prices. In absolute figures, it's not end of the world, right? The prices have dropped by about $4,000, roughly speaking, in terms of the benchmark price. But once again, it's not just that $4,000, it's the fact that a bunch of different condos are on the market and only a few of them are selling, and the ones that are selling are more flexible with their pricing. And that's actually something I wanted to talk about in this video, this sort of timing of the market and when you should buy. I keep on getting this question. Of course, I can't predict the market, but what I can tell you is that I'm seeing a lot of people getting good deals, or good deals comparing to a few months ago, a few years ago, at the moment. And why is that happening? Because a lot of sellers are feeling the pressure of months and months of being on the market, and also months and months of price drops. So now the fear, quote unquote, is setting in, and some sellers are just saying, hey, I just want to sell. I want to get rid of this condo, get rid of this house, and, eat the loss, so to speak. So right now I'm seeing people are getting much better deals than they were even, 4 or 5 months ago. And back then the market was also slow, but clearly looking at the graphs, looking at the statistics, and just my personal experience, I am seeing this sort of pressure of months after months of a market slowdown is really weighing on some sellers, especially the sellers that really need to sell. The other thing that I feel like is weighing on sellers' shoulders is the fact that interest rate drops have not really had a significant impact on the market. In fact, you could argue that they had absolutely no effect on the market. The market continues to be pretty slow. That was, in a lot of sellers' mind, a bit of a saving grace. Well, once the interest rates get low enough, surely the buyers will come back and surely my property will sell no problem. Unfortunately, as of right now, that does not seem like it's been happening. As far as where the market is going over the next little bit, it's of course impossible to predict, but it feels like we are on the slowdown before the holidays. December is probably going to be one of the slower months. Of course, there is no pressure for the buyers to enter the market. It doesn't look like the prices are about to take off anytime soon, especially with the levels of inventory that we are seeing. Even now, this late in the year, there's still a lot of choices for the buyers. So there's a lot less pressure to buy, which means that the market will probably continue to be sluggish for the near future. Lastly, let's talk about the rental market because it has a pretty great effect on the overall prices of real estate. So average Canadian rent has dropped by about 2.2% from November 2024 to November 2025. In Vancouver, the rental rate drops are more extreme, 7.4% year over year, which is pretty high, especially if you consider that this is already like 15th or 16th months in a row of lower rent. A lot of experts are talking about how the rental rate drops will eventually plateau and then continue to go back up. But of course, we're not at that point yet, or at least it doesn't seem like we are at that point yet. I'll try to keep you updated on this YouTube channel for any real estate updates as they come up. Please subscribe so you don't miss those videos when they do come out. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps out quite a bit. And if you're looking for real estate advice here in Greater Vancouver, feel free to get in touch. My contact information will be below. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.